One second. To start off, we're going to ask that each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the campus organizations that they're a part of. Then we have some questions prepared to prompt our conversation, and at the end, we'll be taking questions from the audience. If you think of any questions throughout the panel, feel free to put them in the chat or privately message them to me, and I'll ask them at the end.
Cool, thank you, Claire. My name is Shruti, and I'll be the other moderator tonight. One final note before we get started with introductions. Given that this event is kind of focused on interacting with our student panelists, we'd like to ask that you please keep your cameras on if you're able to do so. And this will just make it a lot easier to engage in an open dialogue with our panelists tonight. So we'll start off with brief introductions. Panelists, after you've introduced yourselves, please feel free to drop your contact information in the chat so that if our audience members want to learn more, they can follow up with you after the event. So Mitchell, do you want to start us off?
All right, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Mitchell Pinsky. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a third year. I'm double majoring in public affairs and city and regional planning. I am the group leader of Students Demand Action, and I'm also sit on the National Advisory Board for it. Essentially, Students Demand Action is a nationwide organization that is focused on gun reform.
Awesome, great, thank you. Destiny, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Destiny Brown. I am a senior and I use she, her pronouns. I'm majoring in political science and I am the director of governmental relations for USG. And last semester, I was involved as a civic engagement organizer for the NAACP to black out the vote. I am also involved as a social change ambassador through the Department of Social Change, where I focus on mentorship and academic support, but also just building a lot of community and the bridge between Ohio State and the communities that we not only gentrify, but also are involved with. And then in my personal capacities, I am very passionate about racial equity and political education. So I have been involved with organizing this past summer and this past fall, different protests on campus and off campus in Columbus and also in Indianapolis. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And we're fortunate enough to have two panelists with us tonight from Ignite. So we can start with Regina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Regina. My pronouns are she, hers. And I'm a first year at Ohio State. And I'm the DEI and membership chair with Ignite OSU. And I'll explain a little, but Natanya can provide more if there's anything else. But we're a national organization with hubs in different colleges dedicated to empowering and providing the resources for women to run for office or even get more engaged in politics. And then our hub, well, our chapter is trying to empower really anyone who hasn't been typically represented in politics.
And then I'll go. I'm Natanya. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a public policy major here at OSU. I'm a first year. I serve as the vice president of Ignite, and Regina covered it. We basically just want to empower women in politics, especially those that haven't seen themselves represented before. And as an organization, we're really striving to kind of broaden our audience through that. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you all so much. So now we're going to move on to the question section. Once again, I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions while you listen, feel free to ask them in the chat, or if you want to message me, I can ask them anonymously, and we'll have time to ask questions verbally at the end. So to start off, how did each of you get started in community organizing?
I can go first. I think that this past year really got me involved in my own capacity and what I can organize. But my introduction to like protests and what that organization looks like, I went to a protest against the death penalty in Washington, D.C. when I did the WAPE program, the John Glenn College. And it was an overnight vigil protest to stay the execution of Rodney Reed. And so that was my first glance at seeing not just, it was only like a group of 20 people outside of his family, but it was such an impactful event that people were able to organize and come together. And then I gave a speech about how I felt about this particular issue. And I looked across from me and Ayanna Presley was right there. And I was like, Congresswoman, like, you're my role model. I love you. And she was like, I can't wait to vote for you one day. And I was like, this is literally a dream come true. I have a picture and everything if anyone ever wants to see. But that was my first like glance at what that organizing truly looks like. And then his execution was actually stayed. And that was so powerful to me. And I was so emotional because I was a part of that momentum and that build up, because the next morning after that vigil, he was sentenced to his execution. And so I was extremely grateful and internally happy that I came across that randomly while I was in DC. So that was my first involvement. And from there, I just learned that I do have agency and control and power, even if it's just one individual stepping up. So that was my first insight on what the impact of community organizing really looks like.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in with how they got started with this type of work?
I'm sure I can actually do it. So essentially, I got involved, just like a lot of people have, at least did in gun reform following the massacre of Marjory Stoneman Douglas in high school in Parkland, Florida. So as I referenced earlier, I'm actually from Boca Raton, Florida, which is about about the town over from Parkland. So essentially, on the day of the massacre, where the massacre occurred, about a mere 10 miles away from my house, pretty much the day of the massacre, I heard the helicopters flying to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in response. And as you may recall, the Snapchat videos that they showed of students, trigger warning, gun violence, as they were trapped in their classrooms during the shooting, and then of them escaping. Basically, I saw those uncensored, and after seeing the impact that gun violence has on a community, I knew that I had to do something to fight. So really since then, I've really learned a lot. But again, but just really the main thing when you look at gun violence, even though, usually what gets the most attention, is the mass shootings that do happen in these more white suburban areas. The majority, the thing is, gun violence, there is so much more to gun violence than just that. So again, it's just really just important just to remember, kind of just like, oh, sorry. Actually, I thought there was someone else talking to me. But yeah, so it's just important so really I've just got involved just because, like, I know that there is so much change, a lot of it really systemic change that needs to happen, because the issue of gun violence is so much bigger than the issue of gun violence than just firearms themselves.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which is, do you see the work that you and your organization does as community organizing, and why does community organizing and the work that you do resonate with you? And again, these are open to anyone who wants to jump in and answer.
I can jump in. I think I look at community organizing with like a very broad definition of it, just that if you are passionate about a similar cause with someone and you're working towards that cause, then I think that classifies as community organizing. And so at Ignite, we all come from pretty wide backgrounds of policy interests or things that we're passionate about. But the thing that unites us is that we're all here to make a change and learn about how we can use our voices. And so I think I do classify it as community organizing. And we do a lot of work with empowering each other with education. I think something that I've personally gone through is sometimes it can be intimidating to want to learn about whatever's happening in the world, to become civically engaged. It seems like there's so many blocks for you to get there, especially as a woman sometimes in such a male dominated field. And so just empowering each other and creating safe spaces to have those difficult conversations, I find that really beneficial.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I think community organizing is just the ability to empower someone else to get involved with the same thing kind of that you are, or just empowering them to find their own avenue that they're passionate about. So I will say within the governmental relations committee, I will say that the work we do is community organizing, because it's not focusing on the barriers that come from administration at the university or from legislators, but we are still actively advocating and pushing the envelope for change for students on our campus. So I will say that classified as community organizing. I will say that in other capacities, anything that gets people involved is also community organizing. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I can take that question too. So I would say really what a lot of what, Students Demand Action does, it is very much grassroots community organizing. And really, I feel like, most effective advocacy nowadays, is going to be community organizing. Because really, with Students Demand Action, we do, and just when it comes to the issue of gun violence itself, really, like, in order to really make a difference, you need to be working with communities on the ground to uplift and empower a broad coalition of people, of folks who actually are going to be, actually helping to combat gun violence. Like, actually, one of the things that our chapter did is we actually sat on the Columbus American Thurs Gun Violence Coalition last year. So again, really, they're like working with a diverse group of stakeholders to really combat the issue. And again, we have that same mentality when we go and testify at the Ohio State House again for gun reform. So really, it's a large thing, but really, it's really ingrained in community organizing.
Great, thank you so much for those answers. So our next question is, some of the biggest struggles you've had to face as organizers, what steps have you taken to adapt to those struggles? And especially, how have you adapted to organizing in the COVID-19 world?
Will you ask the question one more time? It cut out on my end.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's kind of a long question. So it's, what are the biggest struggles you have had to face as an organizer, and what steps did you take to face those struggles? And specifically, you could also talk about how you've had to adapt to organizing in the COVID-19 world.
I think the biggest struggle that I faced in organizing is just like finding the strength within myself to keep going. Like when you face a no, or someone like is like, oh, that idea isn't going to work, or you don't have the support for that. Or like more personally, like I don't like not feeling comfortable maybe to talk to someone about an issue or to like organize for action. I come from like a South Asian immigrant family. And so traditionally it's like not proper for me to like be involved in politics or like speak my mind about those things, especially in like a wide community. And so it just took a while for me to like find that sense of confidence within myself to be like, no, I do have a voice and my voice deserves to be heard. And then in terms of COVID, I think I'm still trying to learn how to adapt, even though it's been a year. I think just like staying engaged online is so hard. Like Zoom fatigue is so real. And so I think just like doing little things to try and make connections online, whether that be a breakout room or like fun, like introduction icebreakers. I don't know if you guys have other ideas. I would love to hear them in the chat because I'm still honestly learning.
I will say that the biggest challenge I have with community organizing is performative activism. I think that a lot of people want to be a part of this community organizing, grassroots advocacy type of field and type of work, but I don't think people truly understand the work that comes along with it. And then I think when people get involved in something that they aren't truly passionate about, it hinders when people are really involved. So like for me, it's understanding that certain people's advocacy can only go so far. So for me, I know my politics, and especially the things that I organize around, is liberation, and that goes for Black liberation for everyone. And I think a lot of people want these little Band-Aid fixes to a lot of things, and aren't truly prepared to get at the root of what dismantling certain systems, certain policies, and truly getting to what's actually causing the issues. And I think that's the biggest issue with community organizing, is that you're going to be faced with so much opposition from people who may look like you, who may be standing alongside you at a point, and then at some point they're going to turn their back to you because they're not truly ready to go as far as you want to. And I think that was the hardest thing that I've come to realize, is that not everybody is on the same wavelength of what this change looks like, this systemic change looks like. For some people, systemic change could look like body cameras for the police. For me, it looks like abolishing the police. And that's a drastically different advocacy, drastically different lens. And I think that was the hardest thing for me to figure out. As for COVID, I think the hardest thing is keeping the momentum, because we're in this virtual world and it's really hard to get fatigued from staring at screens all day and not feeling like you're doing enough. So in the summer, when I was organizing protests in Indianapolis with thousands of people, at a certain point, people are concerned about their health, so people stop going. And it makes sense because we are in a global pandemic, but at the same time, we lost a lot of momentum in the movement because people started retracting, and people need to take time for themselves, which is understandable. But I think COVID placed a lot of hindrance on the progression of things, because that is a barrier. People have different health circumstances that prevent them from being in person. So I kind of adapted to using social media more, but again, that also hindered me because I need to take self-care and I need to take a step back from social media, because you can't be a social media, social justice warrior. You have to do the actual work. So I'm still trying to figure that out, but those were some of my challenges. Oops.
Okay, so I would say probably like the biggest challenge that we have it with students demand action, and just kind of like we also do work like just really I would have to say being trying to push for gun reform in a state with the Republican supermajority can be extremely hard. A lot of times we'll be pushing gun bills that at least we believe are going to make a difference, such as like background checks in every gun sale, red flag laws, and then so instead of like, so usually what'll happen is like we'll put those forward and they'll maybe get one hearing, but instead what happens is we end up dealing with a lot of really just horrible bills, such as the rights to stand your ground, which just got signed into law. I don't know what the fuck DeWine was thinking, but that's that. Just kind of just dealing like with a lot of these, just like, so I think what happens is like a lot of times, when you kind of feel like that the efforts that you want to see aren't happening, it can be extremely frustrating. But at the same time, though, our organization, our advocacy has been able to stop bad gun bills. For example, this past legislative session, there was a Senate bill called Senate Bill 317, which would have armed teachers which would have allowed school boards to decide what requirements they want for teachers to be armed. And as it was shown, and which could amend, and this probably would have been pursued by a lot of school boards, is letting teachers be armed in schools with little to no training. But what we can do, because with Students Demand Action, we also work with Moms Demand Action a lot too, is we were able to put forth a lot of testimony and stop Senate Bill 317 from making, from actually being signed into law and passed. So it's a term that we call losing forward, and especially in a state with a Republican supermajority, it kind of means even though we didn't get past what we wanted, we were able to stop something that was bad. It would have been nice to be able to stop Stand Your Ground, but again, I don't know.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that one thing like I've been struggling with is like figuring out boundaries while still sustaining like an active pattern of activism. Because like I do a lot of work with like climate justice, and especially with the climate crisis, it feels like, oh well, time's running out, so you need to like do everything you can like right now. And like realistically, if you put all that on yourself, like you're not gonna get much done and you get burnout. So figuring out how to be like, oh, maybe I should collaborate with others on this project, or maybe say no for once. Figuring out a pattern so that you can be involved, but like not put too much on your plate at the same time. And that has gotten hard. But that's something I've been working on. And yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for those very open and honest perspectives. So our next question is, how do you ensure that you are addressing community needs in your work, and what are some ways that you center equity and inclusion in your community organizing?
So something I learned, I was once a leadership studies minor, but then I got to senior year and I was like, ooh, I do not want to do this capstone. So I will say I was partially a leadership studies minor, but the most important thing I learned in those classes is that in order to do any type of community work, you need to do community assessment. So that means not fully delving yourself into the work, but taking a step back and seeing what's already being done and not reinventing the wheel. So I think that in a lot of ways, something I learned from this summer is that my city in Indianapolis had our own organizations dedicated toward racial justice and civil rights. But something I saw, there was a gap. There was a gap between youth involved and younger people involved. There was a lot of older people speaking on what this should look like, but there was never enough youth voices and younger voices involved. So that was something that I was able to take a step back and look and then fill in the gap. Something that I've learned through the Department of Social Change and the work that I've done with them is that you have to have the community relationship intact before you can do anything. And I think that's the biggest thing that I see problematic about some organizing, is that I never see enough people that are especially when we're speaking around racial justice. Sorry, this is my little, that's my passion. But like when you have individuals who are slain at the hands of police, or just racist people in general, a lot of people feel like they can just dive into this work and create different things and do things that have been previously done, but that might not be what the family that wants. The family might just truly want some mourning, some time to decompress, some time for themselves to come together as a unit before they get a politicized version of their family. And that was something I learned over the summer with one particular family in my city. Mikhail Rose was murdered by IMPD on May 6th, and his family took more time to kind of understand like and grasp what truly happened to their child, and kind of find understanding before moving toward, okay, so we demand this from the city, we demand this from the police department, and you follow the lead of that and the organizing you do. So that's kind of how you, in order, and when you do that, that is centering equity, that is centering everything that was mentioned in this question, because you are making something fair and equitable for the family, because that's what's most important. And I think that is what should be on the forefront, is taking a step back to look at everything. I think it was taking a step on the balcony was the true leadership phrase, but you take a step back, you assess what's going on, you evaluate what's going on, and then you act, and then you step in. But you can't do that without being involved with the community and being involved with the families that are truly impacted by these issue areas that you're focusing on. So I think in my USG capacity, I don't think I do that enough. In my social change capacity, I think I do that a lot. In my personal capacity, I'm working to make sure that I'm always doing that. But I think that's something that I could grow in my USG capacity in like a couple weeks I have left, is figuring out ways that I can better involve the Columbus community in the work we do.
All right, thank you for that answer. That was very thoughtful. So our next question is, what has been your favorite event or campaign that you've organized? And can you walk us through the steps that you had to take to make it a success?
Can you say the question one more time? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. The question is, what has been your favorite event or campaign that you've organized? And can you walk us through how you organized that event to make it successful?
Sure, I guess I can take this one. So, okay, so I would say that one of my favorite events that we did was actually in conjunction with one of the Students Domain Action chapters over at Grandview Heights High School, and it was actually a rally that we put that pretty much like myself and two other students planned essentially. That was like it was like the week after we had the mass shooting in Dayton and the mass shooting in El Paso. And at the time Congress was still in recess. So what we did at Students Demand Action was we had like a nationwide call to action in which different cities hosted a rally, demanding that Congress get back in session and actually reform. So pretty much what we did is I worked with the two students over at Grandview Heights High School, and what we did is we planned out the logistics. So what we did is we planned kind of like a marching route, that started out at the I forgot what park it is downtown that's right next to the Scioto Mile River. So we planned out that marching route that would then go down to the State House. But essentially, so we did that. We reached out to different elected officials to join us and to be speakers. So we ended up having like over 200, like probably about 200 people coming, marching down, downtown, stopping by Senator Portman's office, demanding that they catalyze gun reform. And it's just a really, it is my favorite thing about it was just knowing when you do put forth the effort to create an event, you never know who's going to show up. And to be able to have hundreds of people show up really just goes to show you, like the impact that you can make with your community organizing. And, and I think that's with community organizing, even as kind of Destiny was highlighting, like when you really can tap into the community and really make sure that, that you aren't stepping on the toes of who's already there, but really just, listening to the community already and working together, you can make a big difference.
I think that my favorite organizing event had to be June 6, 2020, when I and a few other Black women organized the largest protest in 45 years in Indianapolis. And we had 10,000 people come to the State House for a sit-in event. It was centered around demands for the city, not only the city, but the state. That's why we were at the State House. The weekend before that, I was at the downtown monument organizing. And then also the day after that, or the weekend after that, I went to the War Memorial. So I went to very intentional places around the city that I know touched a lot of history in not the last place, but that place in particular on June 6th was the State House. And I was very frustrated that day, not going to lie, because it was a lot of performative speeches from the mayor and the congressman who had ignored my calls and messages and emails for the few weeks prior to that protest. So I was a little irritated that they were like, hey, Destiny, I have your number now. Let me come speak. And I was like, oh, thank you for caring, because now 10,000 people of your constituency showed up. But we had marched around the city after that, and we had went to the county jail, and we heard some people shouting from there. And it was really inclusive for me to involve them, because they are also in harsh conditions in the jails with COVID last year. But it was such a rewarding experience to look up and realize that my little social media Facebook event that I had on my Facebook circulated to 10,000 people in my city. And it was, I don't know, I just saw so much potential. Granted, again, the challenges come with performative activism and stuff like that. But for a moment of time, I saw that there is potential for true mass gatherings and change. So for me, that will always be something that's stuck in my brain forever. And it's now part of Indiana state history. So I'm really proud of myself for that.
Yeah, my favorite event is actually something that is still in the middle of planning with Sunrise Columbus. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Fridays for Future, but on March 19th, they're organizing like a global strike. And so Sunrise Columbus is organizing the one here in Columbus. And we have a lot of speakers that have said that they can come or support us from like other organizations, like environmental organizations, and even other like social justice related organizations. We have like Nina Turner, who's possibly coming, Morgan Harper. So I'm just really excited about it. And it's been a really cool experience organizing it.
Awesome. All those projects sound really cool. So thank you so much for sharing like more specifics. So our next question, I think actually combines very well with the question in the chat. And so it's, how do you balance your community organizing work with school, and how do you avoid burnout? And I think that goes really well with Olivia's question that kind of asks something similar as to what your self-care looks like and how you can kind of rationalize taking a break from the work that you do.
I can start us off. I think Regina mentioned it earlier, like knowing when to say no and like kind of understanding that it's okay for you to pass on a project is like a really good place to start. And I think it just comes from realizing that like, yes, you are powerful and you are an agent of change and you are doing amazing things, but you'll never get there if you burn out. Like you do have to take the time to like recharge and spend time with people that you love and just like chill out sometimes. You can't always be changing the world. And so I think it's just hard sometimes when you're like, I don't want to like sit down and relax, because it kind of seems like you have like the privilege to do that sometimes when you're fighting for an issue that seems so much more important. But I just think it comes down to like really prioritizing yourself, even if it's just like 10 minutes. Like I religiously read a chapter of my book every night, and that's like my self-care, like even just those small things. And it's like 10 minutes, but just like finding something throughout the day where you can be like, this is my time for myself. That's what I would say. Yeah.
I would say that boundaries are good, and that comes from, again, what you just said on learning when to say no to certain things, but also certain boundaries with like people you might be organizing with, boundaries for yourself on just like, okay, after this time, I'm not going to be the warrior that I am. I'm going to be the Destiny that exists and likes to watch TV and just chill out. And I think that's a learning process that I'm still trying to accomplish, is that boundary setting, because I think that that will truly set you free. But something else that I learned is that resistance is also a part of protests. And with that resistance is joy. Joy is a big part of resistance. So when you are actively finding ways to make yourself happy, you're also combating different oppressive systems that were meant to make you unhappy and make you in these subordinate positions. So I think in any way possible, finding grounding, that's like putting my feet in the grass. I love that. And taking a step back and existing for once. Something that I tell to my committee, Mitchell, you can attest to this, is that self-care is a requirement for leadership, not a recommendation. You cannot pick and choose when you want to care for yourself. You literally have to do that in order to be a leader. So that's something that I am trying to actively practice as much as I'm preaching it. But I think that's the best part of self-care and organizing.
Yeah, I would say it's really kind of echo, in addition to what's already been said. I would say really a big thing, is just knowing yourself and just, and staying in touch with your mental health. Like, for example, like maybe like let's say, like that you're planning an event, but you just wake up one day and you're just feeling like out of it. You're feeling like, just you're not in a good headspace. Oftentimes, don't forget, with community organized, you have other people that you're organizing with, so don't be afraid to to make the ask, like, so for example, like for Students Demand Action, like, we have an executive board. So if there's one day like where I am just not feeling it, I might just ask someone on my executive board, like, hey, you know what, do you mind just taking on XYZ task? But by doing that, you're also sharing the responsibility. And it's just important, I think, for people to remember as community organizers, that you don't have to take on everything, because it can be emotionally draining, it can be mentally draining, and it can be physical draining to engage community organizing. But you need to really just rely on other, I guess just don't be afraid to rely on others if you're feeling bad.
Great, thank you so much for those answers. We have one last question before we're going to move on to audience questions, and it's, why should the people in the audience today get involved in their communities?
So sorry I am talking a lot, but I think people should get involved with your community, especially people on the call, because someone is going to get involved and they might not have your best interests at heart. So I know this is like OSU votes. So my little plug with GR2 is that someone is always going to vote. They're just not going to vote for what you want to vote for. So you could complain on the sidelines or you could get involved. And that's something I learned, is I tend to complain a lot and question a lot of the injustices that go on. But complaining will do nothing if you're not getting involved yourself. So if that's something that I could tell to everyone, is that someone will always do the work. It just might not be the work that's for you and for your betterment. And so you should always do what you can to get involved. Granted, you don't have to be someone that organizes a protest or leads some sort of something, but someone is doing the work and you could always amplify what they're doing, especially if you're focusing on racial equity. Black queer women always take the lead on that. So you could always amplify what they're doing if you're unsure on how to truly get involved yourself. But again, someone will always be doing the work, and it's not going to be for you most times. It's going to be for themselves. So you should always do what you can if you have the capacity to involve yourself in what's going on.
Just echoing what Destiny said, I think a really good place to start is always just like educating yourself, and not just from like mainstream news, like trying to find who's actually doing the work, like Destiny mentioned, and then reading about it and being like, is this what I feel about this issue? Is this how I think it should be addressed? And then you can go from there and find an organization that either is like doing what you support, or if not, then you found like an issue that maybe you can combat. And like Destiny said, just like looking at what your capacity is. But I think like education is always a really good place to start. And like in performative activism, that's like lost. It's kind of just like you show up to an event and then you forget about it, or you post something on Instagram and then you forget about it. And really doing that like deep dive into the issue and the solutions for it is always a really good place to start.
I would say just getting into community organizing is really important, because the truth is you never know the impact that you're going to make. For example, you could start off somewhere small and then you can meet someone, and then when you talk with them, you become really engaged in an issue. You become really passionate about an issue. Then all of a sudden you're there, really helping to lead the charge for an issue. I think especially, I think, even though, all forms, I think it's important just to be, an involved, member of your community. And it can be as simple, as calling your member of Congress, calling your city council member, just asking them to take action on a bill. And really another thing too, when you become involved in your community, you meet so many amazing people who have been doing work to make the live, so when you meet, a lot of times when you are doing advocacy and the issues that you care about, you meet amazing people, who are really making a difference in the community. Again, this is also assuming that these are people who want to help you. Again, as Destiny pointed out, there are a lot of people out there who unfortunately want to do the opposite. So yeah.
I just wanted to add something real quick. The question is, why should you get involved? But I think a better question would be, why shouldn't you get involved when so many members of our community are being impacted by different issues, whether it be racial injustices or climate change, and if you have the power to do something about it? I mean, why wouldn't you take up the opportunity to get involved?
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for all of those answers. Given the 15 minutes that we have left, we're going to leave space for audience questions. And so we have some in the chat. And then if anyone wants to raise their hand, feel free to do that as well. But we can start with one of the ones that was in the chat. So a question is, how do you know what goals to set for your community events and define success for them without over or underestimating the outcomes?
I think by goals for me, I feel like I'm a protester type of organizer. Demands are always the goals. And for me, I live a very limitless life. And I think that everybody should too, because that is liberation. So I don't think there's any type of overestimating what you can achieve and what you should ask for, because freedom is the ultimate goal for me. So I don't believe in boundaries. I believe that you should be asking for and grasping everything at the root to completely get rid of these oppressive systems, these oppressive laws, policies, anything like that. So for me, I don't think there's overestimating. Granted, other people might have smaller goals. My long-term goal is liberation. Short-term goal could be focusing on police divestment from the university and CPD, and what does that look like in setting goals, and being realistic with yourself about what could be feasible in that. But for me, I am a very my goal is liberation and freedom. So I don't really foresee anything being an overestimate or a limit to what I want to do, because I know at the end of the day, what I'm advocating for isn't impacting anyone or trying to oppress anyone. It's truly trying to free people. So yeah, that's kind of my take on that, but it might be different from other organizers on the panel.
Yeah, similar to Destiny, one thing that we with the strike we're planning right now, is the first thing we did was think of what demands we're gonna ask for, and what leaders we're targeting. So at the city level, the state level, the federal level, and what are we asking of them? Just because that makes it easier for us to oh, well, if these are the demands, then these are probably the graphics we should make or the strike signs we should make. And it makes it easier for other organizations to get in line with what we're doing. And yeah, that's kind of our goal. And it also makes it easier to see in the end if it was successful or not, if we got a reaction from the people we were targeting and whether they acted on our demands or not.
Great, thank you guys for sharing with us. So we have two questions in the chat that are kind of similar, and so I'm going to combine them together. And it's, how do you approach conversations with people who don't understand or don't relate to your cause? And especially if those people might be your loved ones.
I am so sorry. If you could repeat that just once more.
Yeah, so I'm combining two questions together. The first one is, How do you approach conversations with people who don't understand your cause? And especially, how do you approach those conversations if the people that don't understand your cause might be your loved ones?
I would say that actually that's a really good question. So I think so kind of just looking at this from like a gun reform issue. So when you're looking at it from a, at least ideally, I think, when you're doing politics, ideally you want to try and find common ground. You want to try and find, that compromise to try and find a common solution. So that's the way, and generally that I'll approach it, that will approach it. Like, for example, like, if there's someone, who feels a certain way about firearms, I might kind of talk to them and try and figure out why they feel that way. So I think, it's important, you want to try and find that compromise, but it's also too important to remember that a lot of times there are people you are just not going to, that you won't be able to compromise with, and you don't want to compromise with. Like, for example, if there is someone who is truly a racist and truly a fascist, for example, and really does not believe in basic human rights for everyone, don't waste your time trying to compromise with them. Or don't waste your time trying to compromise or trying to talk with them, because more than likely you'll probably I guess what I'm trying to get at is you want to try and find a fine line between people you can reasonably try and find a compromise with and people that they're like a lost cause.
Yeah, one of the things that they talk about when like in climate justice organizing, especially when you're talking to climate deniers, is instead of trying to appeal to them with like facts and be like, oh, well, here's all the facts saying that climate change is real and that we need to act on it, that usually doesn't work. But if you appeal to them on an emotional level and tell them, well, here's my story, this is why I'm acting on it, and this is why you should too, it tends to be a lot more successful. But like Mitchell was saying, if there's someone that you just can't even reach a middle ground with, at some point you just have to decide that it's probably not worth your time and energy.
I think that a lot of people like to use the word allyship, and this is the only time I will say it. But I think that the only time that we should kind of give a little, positive light to allyship is that there are people in proximity, especially depending on identity, that might be closer to someone that isn't understanding you. So for me, like Mitchell was saying, I'm not about to argue with a racist at a protest. It's not going to happen. I'm using my energy for something that I know will never change. But if you have someone that's in proximity, for example, to whiteness, that person will have the ability to have that conversation. But for me, I'm not going to have that conversation because you're not committed to understanding. You're committed to not understanding me, and you will never understand me. So that could be an avenue for allies to come in and have those conversations. But enough of the allyship conversation. I think that also picking your battles is very, very key. So I know a lot of people praise like sitting at the table and stuff like that. But if you're just sitting at the table to be gaslighted and to be ignored and ostracized, it's pointless. Why would I be at that table? I already know what I'm getting myself into. And that's where I've came to an understanding, is that certain tables aren't meant for you to sit at. Certain tables aren't really worthy of being at the table, and you can create your own table. So I think that would be a time where you find your own avenue to speak with loved ones. I think you're allowed to choose your family. So if someone is so committed to misunderstanding you, for me, especially with identity, you have every agency to find your own family and find people that love you and support you, even if that does not include blood. Not saying you should cut off your family, but if it has to come to that because they don't want to love and support you for who you are and how you are, then so be it. But yeah.
Great, thank you all for sharing. Our next question in the chat is, how can students work to make their advocacy intersectional without speaking over the voices of advocates from marginalized communities?
I will take this one and start it off. I think when you enter spaces with advocacy, it's really important to understand your privilege. And someone before mentioned the importance of educating yourself. So educating yourself means, what privileges do I have, and am I taking up too much space? And I think that's something really important that I have been able to kind of be more aware of, is like, at sometimes is okay to be quiet and let them lead and let them take the stand to speak, or whatever that may be. I will say that, again, it kind of comes back to the point I made about assessment of the community you're working with when it comes to advocacy, is allowing, they're already having these conversations. They're having their own meetings at their own tables in their own communities. And it's about you making sure you're entering their space, being respectful, and finding every avenue you can to amplify their voices without overpowering them or speaking for them, because everybody on this earth has their own power. And I believe that you should never speak for someone who does not want to be spoken for. And you should never make that choice for someone because you might have the tools and the resources of the education on how to effectively organize. You should still always make sure that you're assessing who you're advocating for and make sure that they're involved.
Okay, awesome. And I think for the sake of time, we'll do one more, but we'll try to keep it kind of short. Do each of you want to name like maybe the biggest one or two skills that you've taken away from your time organizing?
Let's see. I guess I could go first. I would say my first one is actually just like a really practical skill, is actually just like event planning and organizing. Because like, just throughout my time with Students Demand Action, like I have put on different events and different panels. So, so really I've kind of learned, it kind of, I guess, kind of like, how to go about like, okay, I'm having this event on Friday. I mean, like I'm having this event, we have this idea. So I guess kind of taking how to get like an idea to a finished product. So really kind of just like about the logistics, kind of like how do you reach out to elected officials? How do you reach out to the community? How do you recruit people to actually get to your event? So I would say that was the biggest thing. And then also the second skill is really just empowerment, and really kind of just staying, like what happens, like when you can empower, I guess really kind of like really like when you can empower people to catalyze change, like the difference that you can make. So really kind of I've just learned just different like general grassroots empowerment skills, or how you go about doing that.
I'll go ahead and echo what Mitchell said. I think like very basic logistical planning skills, just like even for something just as simple as like a panel like this, it still takes like research to find out who you want to invite to come speak at a panel, and then just like finding their emails and figuring out like what the vision for a panel is and how to bring that to life, and who's gonna like enhance that conversation. And then so I think like expanding your network and using your network that way. And as far as like a protest goes, I think there's a whole nother logistical level of complication that comes with that, whether there's going to be interactions with law enforcement, or if you guys need some sort of protection, if a highway needs to be blocked off, whatever that needs to happen. Those are very like logistical things that I've learned. But on a more like personal level, I think just like a confidence or like a level of empowerment that I have gained through community organizing, just like seeing that I can activate change, and like seeing that happen, or hearing someone say, oh, like I had a conversation with you and then that ignited my passion for blah, blah, blah. And I'm now doing this to address that. And just like being like, oh, the work that I'm doing is making an impact, especially times when you are starting to feel burnt out. Those are, I guess that wasn't really a skill, but yeah, that's where my answer went.
Yeah, similar to what Tanya said, like the power of like one-on-one relational organizing, like a struggle we had with like both Ignite and Sunrise Columbus is that like a lot of people would like join the group me or like the Slack, but then like not much action was done, or they didn't get very involved. But then once you did like one-on-one check-ins, they were more likely to show up to the meetings or like really feel appreciated within like the organization. So just knowing how to check in with people, or even bringing a friend to the event, makes the whole movement grow stronger and better. And also like confidence in learning how to do public speaking, and learning how to tell your story.
I think a skill that I guess I underestimated, but I think is high key the most important, is having creativity, because you have to be creative in different avenues of organizing. So in Indianapolis, it was a sit-in, then it was a march, and then it was a drive where kids were involved. On campus, I organized a protest in September, and we did like chalk, and we went around and we chalked some of our demands and we chalked some of our things. And I think creative outlets are really important. And I think something that I found as I've been organizing is that some of these avenues of creativity with organizing are actively being suppressed, and your ability to imagine and conceptualize a life so much different than right now truly takes creativity. And I don't think that I have been allowed or been shown the tools that allow you to think differently. So I think that's something that I've really grown in. And I also think that I would say urgency is a skill that I learned. I think that a lot of times people have told me, oh, this change will come eventually. And with the right amount of organizing and the right community behind you, anything can happen overnight. Plug to the Black Caucus in USG, and the chair and the system operations vice chair, Amanya and Osei. That kind of change literally came overnight in the Senate chambers at a General Assembly meeting last year. And I think that was really powerful and a testament to where you don't have to wait for all of these long meetings or wait for these things to come. You could literally make that change yourself with urgency. And so creativity and the skill of urgency, if that's really a skill, I think are the best things I've learned.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of those perspectives and answers. We are officially out of time, but we just want to say thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time to come talk to us. You brought some really insightful perspectives for organizing here at Ohio State, especially as students. I see that Mitchell's like dropping his contact info again. So if we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists if you have questions later on. And thank you so much again, panelists. And thanks everyone for being here. Have a really good night.